Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Answers for May 4th, 2021, National Teacher Appreciation Day. And to all the teachers who are viewing this, thank you to all of you, from all of me. In this edition of Answers, there will be an update on the latest developments in special education by yours truly. Special guests Walt Glomb and Linda Ramler will join us later to discuss transition programs in this era of the pandemic. And as always, there will be time for Q&A from participants. So let's get ready to hit Q&A or chat if you have a question. This webinar is brought to you by PATH Connecticut, a nonprofit organization that served families of children with special needs for 35 years. Here you see a partial list of the programs and services we offer. It's important to remember that all our programs and services are provided at no cost to the families we serve. For more information about PATH, please go to the PATH website, pathct.org. If you have any questions about this webinar, you can contact me directly at kdaly@pathct.org. And while you're online, be sure to friend us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch us on YouTube, where you'll find videos of all the Answers webinars. Here's the fine print, folks. This is not intended to be legal advice. This webinar is not intended to be healthcare advice. It's not intended to be advice of any kind. It is the property of PATH Connecticut and should not be used for any other purpose. Here's the school update for May 4th. It's been 15 months since March 2020, when the pandemic shut down America's public schools. When schools started up in the fall, most schools in the nation and in our state did not reopen for full-time in-person learning. Instead, most schools relied on the alternatives: hybrid learning and full remote learning. Also, families could opt out of in-person learning completely for full-time remote. Over the course of the pandemic and the school year, the pandemic started to ease in most parts of the country, and public schools have started returning to in-person learning. Let's see how it looks nationally. Currently, in 35 states, in-person instruction decisions are made on a local level, in other words, by the school district. Connecticut is one of those states. The state government provides guidelines and recommendations, and decisions on in-person learning are made by the local school districts. Only 2 states have a state-ordered closure in effect. That's Delaware and Hawaii. In both, remote instruction is ordered for communities that are being hit hard by the virus, and that's as determined by metrics like the positivity rate and community spread. Public schools in these 12 states are under state order to remain open for in-person instruction. For example, in Washington state, schools must provide in-person instruction for at least 30% of the school week. In Texas, the state has ordered schools to provide full-time in-person instruction to any family who wants it. School districts that do not comply face a loss of funding. Massachusetts and Arizona have ordered their school districts to open some grades for in-person instruction, but not all grades. It seems high school is the apparent cutoff point. Both states are on the fast track for opening all schools to in-person learning before the end of the school year. Put them together, and it's a colorful picture. And it's quite different from what I reported in February, when fewer states were ordering schools to provide in-person learning. And it's quite different from what I reported in November, when more states were ordering schools to go remote. This is progress, especially compared to this time last year. Of honorable mention are the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. DC schools will not have full-time in-person instruction until the fall. And in Puerto Rico, All schools recently moved back to remote instruction after an effort to reopen was derailed in April by a spike in coronavirus cases. Meanwhile, here in Connecticut, according to the latest data from EdSite, 75% of Connecticut school districts right now are offering full-time in-person instruction. 21% are using hybrid, and only 5% are using remote. This is an improvement over just 3 months ago when I gave my last report, when only 58% of our school districts were offering full in-person instruction. At that time, 36% were in hybrid mode and only 6% were in full remote. And here's a news flash. Last week, the State Department of Education announced Connecticut school districts will not be required to continue remote learning in the fall. So that's something that just might go away. It makes one ask, what does this all mean? Are schools on the fast track to fully reopen? Will it be in the fall? The positivity rate is down. Most COVID restrictions in Connecticut will be eased later this month. Could we be looking at the light at the end of the tunnel? Time will tell. We still don't know where the pandemic will take us. But if there is anything we've learned over the last 15 months, it's this. Compared to full-time in-person instruction in a school, remote learning at home is far from ideal. I don't mean to sound like a crybaby. School people are making a huge effort to make remote instruction work, but remote learning will never completely replace going to school. And any educator who's worth their salt will tell you that. So how does all this affect special education students? It's a given. The challenges that general education students face are magnified in students with disabilities. The demands of remote learning can be tolerated by many students and the general education students, and also by many special education students. I even know some who do better remotely in their academic classes than ever before. But for many special education students, they simply don't engage well with remote learning. And for some, it's impossible. How all of this affects special education students was something that was looked at earlier this year in a poll by the National Federation of Families, which is a nonprofit organization with over 120 chapters and organizations nationwide. NFF surveyed 1,100 families representing 2,300 children in all 50 states. About 60% of the families have at least one child with an IEP or a 504 plan, and the respondents had children in schools that were using all three learning models. NFF asked, how do caregivers feel school is going for their children? The response indicated 49% said worse than expected, 25% said better, and 26% said as expected. When NFF asked, what do caregivers say is the most challenging? Number one, balancing school and work time. Number two, meeting special education needs. Number three, navigating platforms. Number four, obtaining support from teachers and the school. NSF asked, are your child's IEP or 504 plans being met? 9% felt their child's needs are being met well. 18% said they are mostly met. 39% said they are somewhat met. And 33% said they are not met. FNN also looked into the impact of the pandemic on the mental health of caregivers and their children. And according to NFF, caregivers report that both the caregivers and their children are experiencing a 70% increase in behavioral health symptoms that include anxiety, depression, substance use, etc. Interestingly, respondents reported that adults are accessing mental health services more frequently than their children, 56% versus 39%. Now, this just might reflect the fact that there are a limited number of professionals who serve children with these needs. So this is certainly affecting our children and us too. Let's change gears and focus on the main event, which is the transition from school to adult life in the COVID-19 era. I'm going to ask Audra Talbot to join us.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me tonight. So we're going to talk about transition tonight, and we have some great special guests with us. But first, we're going to talk about the basics of transition and the new realities families face in the COVID era. But first, one should ask, what is transition? Well, all students transition to and from high school to adult life. This is the way it just goes. And most high schools have guidance departments, staffed by professionals who are trained to assist students with their post-secondary choices. Students with disabilities can use guidance department services too, but there are some who need support making the transition, the kind of support that special education provides. Special education students are entitled to have the transition program that is built into their IEP. It should be based on the student's individual needs, strengths, preferences, and interests. In other words, it should be individualized, which we all know what that word means if you're in the special education realm. But not one size fits all. So what can a transition plan provide to special education students? As needed, it can be instruction, related services, which together are the essence of special education, community experiences, the development of employment and other adult living objectives, daily living skills, if appropriate, and a functional vocational evaluation. Remember those words, functional vocational evaluation. For some students, a vocational evaluation is entirely called for. For others, it's not. It depends on the student's individual needs, once again. What does a special education student's when does a special education student transition program begin? Age 16 for most special education students. Age 14 for special ed students with autism.
And here we are. Good evening, everyone. Kevin, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
All right, I'm going to jump right into my PowerPoint, so bear with me.
But first, Walt, I'd like to say a few words about you, because you are the father of a former special education student, and your son made the transition from school to adult life and went on to make some great accomplishments. In fact, he's still going. Walt is well known to the public from his involvement in numerous boards and councils like the Down Syndrome Congress and the Connecticut Council for Developmental Disabilities. He's also known for being a fixture on Capitol Hill in Hartford, where he keeps an eye on the laws and policies that affect our children and the adults they will become. I asked Walt to join us and talk about the realities of transition and what parents should expect. So Walt, I'm turning it over to you now. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you, Kevin. That was very kind of you. What I'd like to do is share some of the lessons learned from my experience with my own son. He's now in his early 30s, and my advocacy work about what you should expect as you leave the school system and move on to that world, as I say here, beyond the PPT. So here we go. And then, of course, I'd be happy to take questions when we're all done here. So the question is, what happens? I mean, how is your child going to live after high school? You know, for those of you who have children who are not in special ed, they finish school, you pack up their stuff, you send them off, you wish them the best, and you hope for the best. But of course, for our kids who have been in special ed, like my son, it's a little more complicated than that, okay? What I want to emphasize in this talk is focus on what anybody would do after high school, and then look for the accommodations or the services that will help your child, you know, live that life. All the things that any other individual would do when they leave school: work, their own apartment, social groups, friends, living independently. Now, when you're in school, you may not realize it, but you are benefiting from one of the strongest legal mandates you will ever see for your child's special needs. You have a voice in the PPT. The IDEA gives you a tremendous amount of authority there, not always evident, but it's a pretty strong mandate. But when school ends, it's a different world. Okay, as I say here, you're not in Kansas anymore. Okay, in the adult world, there are very few entitlements for adults. There are services, but you don't have the same level of mandate that require the state or anyone else to do anything in particular. So there's some work to be done in understanding what these things are, okay? And understand there are going to be a variety of places where you can get services, okay? If I go back to that last slide. At the state level, we have, here's just 7 different organizations or agencies that might be in a position to provide assistance to your adult child, and there are more. So as I said, the first thing to realize is that unlike your local education authority, your local school system, there really isn't any one-stop shopping for services for an adult. When you're in school, it's pretty much up to the school to do everything that needs to be done to provide the education for that child. As an adult, it's not quite as simple. So I'd like to walk through some of the different areas that you might want to consider. And of course, I'm happy to take questions on this later. Again, the first thing I suggest you would do is consider what anybody else would do first. Sometimes this is hard, especially after your child's been in special education all these years. You tend to be thinking, you know, it's always the special program, the special service, and for sure, there's going to be some of that in their life. But always start out first looking at what everybody else is doing. And there's a tool here, there's a link at the bottom here, and I provided these slides to Kevin to share with all of you, for those of you who want the links. There's a life course planning tool, the link's at the bottom of this slide, that'll help you, you know, take this approach. But it's important to understand that only a small fraction of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities actually access formal paid services from the system. Much of the support that people get as adults come from other places. Generic services. Remember, under the ADA, Title II requires any public accommodation, any public service to accommodate individuals with disabilities. So that's step one. Okay, consider what everybody else does. Okay. The next thought I have is, before you go looking at services, before you go looking at state resources and programs, understand what exactly does your child want. Now they're an adult now, so hopefully you have the ability to communicate at some level with your child about what they want, what they desire, what are their aspirations. Again, the life course planning tool is ideal for this, okay? But it's important to understand where you want to go, what you want to achieve before you start looking at programs, before you start looking at different resources. Unfortunately, some people get this backwards. There's a tendency for some to jump right to the list of DDS programs and decide, well, which one do I want? Well, before you go there, what are your child's goals and aspirations? What do they want to accomplish? Then start looking at, how do I get the supports that are going to get him or her to that goal? Another lesson that I hope everyone will appreciate is that housing and supports are two different things. Now, in some of our service system, particularly within the Department of Developmental Services, sometimes these things get bundled, in, say, a group home environment. But it's important to appreciate that these are two different things. When you're looking for supports, the types of programs that will help you with housing are quite different from the programs that are going to help you with services, independent living supports, and things like that. An example here is that Medicaid, Title 19 waiver services, which you may become familiar with, will not pay for housing. Housing is not a Medicaid benefit. Housing is not something that generally DDS can provide unless you pay for it. You may know that individuals in receiving services from DDS may be living in community living arrangements, otherwise known as group homes, getting their services there. What you may not appreciate is that those individuals have to sign over their Social Security benefits to the operator of that group home to pay their rent. So yes, they still have to pay rent, they still have to pay room and board one way or another. So when you're entering the adult service system and looking for supports for your child, these are two different exercises, okay? The supports for housing are separate from the supports for independent living and others, okay? Another general lesson to appreciate is that there's a wide variety of personal situations. Everybody's different. And whatever stories you've heard from other people about what kind of services they're getting, whatever you see, appreciate that different people have different needs, different people have different personal resources. Abilities are different. Some people can earn more than others. Some families have more resources than others. So programs vary, and the evolution of adult services is in the direction of customization, individualization, and individual choice. So expect an environment where you're going to have to learn about a lot of different options and make choices that are appropriate to your situation. Another general lesson that I would share with people, for those of you whose children have intellectual disabilities and would be eligible for DDS, and if you're not aware, eligibility for DDS requires an IQ of 69 or lower. DDS is not Walmart. DDS is a boutique provider of select Medicaid waiver services, some very good services, but they don't provide everything, and they're not the one-stop shop. You really need to explore the other parts of the state that might have, and local, that might have support for you, including social services, mental health and addiction services, housing, labor, transportation, and so forth. So as you make the transition, if you're only talking to DDS, I would encourage you to explore some of the other parts of the state. And I had a list of those agencies earlier. Now, what does a person do when they leave school, when they leave public school, when they finish high school or they turn 21, leave your transition program out of the IDEA? Well, one thing that many people do is they go to college. I mean, that's what lots of folks do, whether you're in special ed or not. And it's an option for people in special education too. I won't dwell on this because I think Linda has more to say on this tonight. But keep in mind that post-secondary education, college, is an option, even for individuals with intellectual disabilities, and I'll leave it at that. Okay. The other thing that's essential for everybody is employment. Now, employment is important for a variety of reasons. First of all, as I said, people have to pay their rent. And if a person is able to earn some money, they're probably going to have a better life. So, there are many programs out there to assist people in getting work, even with disabilities. And again, keep in mind, under the ADA Title II, not just government, ADA generally, private employers have to make accommodations for individuals with disabilities. Beyond that, we have supported employment programs offered by Department of Developmental Services, BRS. I'll get to a list in a minute, but please consider employment. The other advantage of employment is that, at least what I found with my son, a job is a great, safe, healthy social environment for an individual during the day, right? If a person is working at a supermarket or a retail store or a restaurant or a factory or a warehouse or wherever, they're in an environment that is probably safe because businesses have to comply with OSHA, probably has some level of supervision, some level, and they, and some social. I mean, I don't know about you, but in my adult life, much of my social life has revolved around the people I work with. So employment is a great day program, if you will, for people, and the individual gets paid for it. So, please consider employment. And there are a number of links here to some different services. A little more on employment. How do you do it? Well, again, like anyone else, how do you find a job? Well, you network, you go to job fair. And then there are a number of state services available to help people find jobs. There are American Job Centers run by the Department of Labor. The Department of Rehab Services has special placement services for people with disabilities. Of course, then there's DDS. DEMIS, Mental Health and Addiction Services, also has supported employment. And we now have customized employment in Connecticut, which I can talk about more if people have questions later. Then there's the independent living. Okay, Connecticut offers a number of supported living options for people. There are links here, both at DSS and through DDS for those who can get them. And most of these nowadays are designed to support a person in their own home. Again, the residence is separate from the supported living services. So once you find a place to live, your own apartment, or even in your relative's home, a family home, you can get support to come to you wherever you live. So the supports aren't tied to the living space, they're tied to the person. And don't overlook your town. Most towns, certainly the larger ones in the cities, have their own social service departments, and there may be local resources to help you. It's not all with the state. Then there's housing. Well, our guys, my son, they don't make a lot of money. They don't have a high income. They're in that space where they are looking for affordable housing. This is perhaps the toughest thing that our kids face as adults, is finding a place to live that they can afford. And once again, this is not a service that DDS will provide. The DDS roster has something like 17,000 people on it, and they're only providing housing for about 3,000 or 4,000 of those. Most folks are on their own. So you're all going to have to, get up to speed on the affordable housing scene in Connecticut. Okay. Now, where do you find affordable housing? Well, of course, many of our guys live at home with their parents for much of their lives. Okay. But then, like anyone else, where do you find a cheap apartment? Well, you go to Craigslist and other, online listings, okay, to find, the best price, deal you can find. Partnering with other families is a strategy that many people use. And then, of course, there are resources at DDS and elsewhere in the state where you can get some support from even the Department of Housing. And as you probably know, there's Section 8 and other services, but be aware, those are very limited. There's long waiting lists. So this is one that you should expect to spend some time on. So in conclusion, again, I'd say begin with what we call the all, okay? What does everybody else do? What's the normal path for a person? And how does your child want to progress? Okay, know what the needs are first, then seek the resources. Okay, I encourage people, I didn't talk about it here much, but I encourage everyone to use alternatives to guardianship. Guardianship is an unnecessary evil in most cases. There are other tools you can use. Talk to me later in the questions if you have questions about that. Remember that housing is separate from supports. There are a variety of options out there. Explore the different resources that are out there. Remember that things change. Okay, state services are changing all the time. Every budget cycle brings some subtle changes to the services that are available. So, you have to stay on top of these things. College, employment, and be involved with organizations like PATH. And with that, I thank you, and I'll take questions after Linda's done.
Thank you, Walt. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to transition to our next speaker, Linda Ramler.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for joining us for Answers.
My pleasure.
I would just like to say a few words about you.
Okay, as long as they're nice.
Sometimes when I do this, I feel like I'm talking about the person as if they're dead. And Linda, I'm so glad you're alive.
Me too. So anything nice that you say, though, I do want on my headstone, okay?
Linda Ramler is with the University of Connecticut Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, also known as the UCED. I'm going to ask her what that is in a second. Linda has 45 years of experience working with people with disabilities. She has worked to promote inclusive education for more than 30 years. Linda provides tech training and technical assistance to public schools about inclusion and a number of other subjects. She also provides technical assistance to people with disabilities, their families, and other stakeholders. So Linda, welcome to Answers.
Thank you.
I have some questions for you, and I also understand that you have a PowerPoint to share at some point. So
I have some, but you know what? I'm going to pull it up when I need a visual example because I'm not that good at explaining something. So I will pop in and grab the screen share when I need to, but I'll let you know ahead of time.
Excellent.
So go ahead, go with the questions.
Well, my first question is, what is the UCED and what do you do there?
UCED is the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, Education, Research, and Service. You forgot the last three parts of it. It takes a lot to say, but UCED is UCEDD. It's not YOUSAID. We're part of a national network that is funded, like Walt's organization, the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities, and our privatized protection and advocacy in Connecticut, Disability Rights Connecticut, under a federal law called the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act of 2000. And that law pretty much says that everybody with a disability, no matter who they are, the significance, severity of their disability, should be fully included in the community and get the supports, and their families should also get the supports that they need to live a quality of life. Just like Walt was saying, consider what everybody else is doing. The DD Act really pushes the idea that everybody is entitled to a quality of life that is enjoyed by other people, shouldn't be segregated, should be fully included with the supports that they need for that to be successful. And another key thing, and it's going to get into that in a little bit later, that comes out of that act is something that was taken from a mom many years ago, Kathy Snow. And what she said is disability is natural. And it's something that, it's like I have brown eyes and starting to get very gray hair. Disability is part of the human existence. And so we need to be respectful of people with disabilities, just like we are with everybody else. So what the USAID does is it pushes dissemination of information. We do in-service and pre-service training, talk a lot of parent groups. Like I said, if somebody wants to call me and say, the school district's doing blah, 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 I can usually help answer the question or point them to somebody who can, like you, Kevin. and that's basically what our function is. It's to make sure that everybody enjoys the quality of life that the DD says they're entitled to.
As you know, our topic is COVID-19 and transition. And I'd like to hear from you, Linda. How has the pandemic affected the transition services that are offered by public schools?
Yeah, I'm one of the things that I didn't say in answer to your first question, Kevin, is what my role is at the USAID. I do training and technical assistance, and I specialize in transition, post-secondary, and adult supports. And I'm a coordinator for all of those activities. Our USAID is primarily early childhood and early intervention. Of the 160 something that are around the country, or 67 rather, that are around the country. I was thinking of Connecticut towns and not USAIDs. Of the USAIDs around the country, Connecticut only has one, and all of them have different flavors. Some of them focus specifically on employment, some focus on health, some focus on generic services. Arizona, for example, is doing a lot with youth. I'm the only person at the USAID with a couple of other people who pitch in now and again who does transition, post-secondary, and adult supports. So that's really my area of expertise. I've been around for a long time, but as somebody said earlier, I've also done a lot of inclusion because I've been around for a while. So what has COVID done? Well, it's done a lot of things in terms of transition, because I want to say about transition is transition should not be school-based. Transition should be community-based. We shouldn't be continuing to focus on basic academics, for example. My view, and I'm going to say this and probably be very unpopular for it, but if you're not reading by the time you're 18 or 19 years old, one of two things is going to happen. You're not going to learn to read proficiently by the age of 22, or it will come when you're highly motivated because you're doing stuff that you like and want to do, not what some teacher says you should be reading and writing about. So I think we have to get rid of the kind of more academic orientation in transition and really look at community-based supports and services. Having said that, most of the towns in Connecticut are moving in that direction. And what COVID did is it basically shut down any of those community experiences that people have. People who had work experience, not at their schools, when schools finally opened up a little bit, some with the hybrid program and so on. People who had work experience out in the community did not have work experience opportunities. There were basically no program, like you had said earlier, Kevin. A lot of kids were impacted because they don't learn well virtually. And it's really hard for people who don't have a vision about what the transition years really should be to teach virtually what that should be. No one was ready for the pandemic. And things were just starting to get better. We were just starting to get schools looking for people to get jobs before they graduated. We were just looking to have them really focus on things other than academics and incorporate something that Walt talked about before, which was life course planning. And all of that kind of came to a screeching halt. But our opportunities in that era, COVID era, are that we can keep. Were you going to ask me that as a second question, or was I just carrying on at this point? Because I think it basically shut down. Everything shut down for a year, plus in many places, and it's still being shut down. So it's not been an ideal situation for transition age students at all.
So what should families do to prepare for transition in this new era with a new ability?
I think we have to look at some of the opportunities. Is that there is some momentum of change still going. There's a number of things going on in Connecticut, like customized employment, like Think College initiatives. Those are still plugging away, if in no other way than training people to become familiar with what those concepts are and to be able to look at what needs to be done Now, unfortunately, a person just died who many years ago convinced me that pre means never. But in preparation for some of the things when we open back up from quarantine, there's a lot that families can do. And at this point, excuse me 1 second. Somebody is making. I have pets. It's supper time. I didn't feed them. Anyway, so I think we want to keep the momentum going as best we can. And what I want to reiterate when Walt looked at that triangle is that a lot of what I think families need to keep in mind is that all those years that you've been going to PPT meetings and you've been fighting with the school district and so on, this is a time to really step up to the plate and know what you want and know what you want to advocate for. And if the school can't do it, to access your own, what we call social capital, and to be able to move forward in connecting your sons and daughters and yourselves with anybody and everybody you can connect with, so that you have those connections when there are no adult services available, because budgets are limited and people basically are in a situation where I don't know where the money's coming from for all the stuff that they're providing for COVID, but I am willing to bet what usually happens is that that comes out of the hide of people with disabilities. And so not only is our special ed budgets going to be cut, so are adult service budgets. And if that's not in the coming year, it's going to happen pretty soon. So I think we really have to have families be prepared in a way that looks at, and I will like to get to my PowerPoint presentation if I could do that, because what the new thinking is, let me just get to current slide. I have to share first and then do current slides. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint here?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what I want to do is I want to start with this that says, one of the things sorry about that. One of the things we need to look at is how we think about kids and young adults and teens and how they're proceeding from school age to adulthood. I think the best thing is to remember what Dr. Martin Luther King said, which is, I have a dream. He did not say, I have an annual plan and quarterly goals and objectives. So the first thing we have to do is look at the dreams. And we can tell what kids like. That's not saying they're going to make a career out of it, but it can help us do something that's called discovery. And that, to me, is what the crux of the transition years are all about. It's learning about who you are. It's understanding your disability, what you need to support yourself in terms of your disability, not in terms of finances, but also to be able to think in terms of having a job and contributing to society. We have gotten, and this is where it really, really hits home, we have an unintended consequences of the traditional deficit model, where we've all sat, I've been a parent too, where I sat at PPT meetings and they told me how horribly behind my kid was and everything that was wrong and we weren't going to get anywhere. We had to remediate this and fix that. What happened with the traditional deficit model, though, is, and this is from Life Course that Walt referenced earlier, is we built bands around individuals. We built bands between them and their families, so families don't feel empowered like they need to. And we also built a service system band between families and the community. So families look first to the service delivery system, but that's a dangerous place to look, as Walt said, when you're an adult. He went through all of those different services that are available if they have room and if they're funded. What we need to start thinking about for transition, this is where parents can really start working on not only their own frame of mind and also preparing their sons and daughters, is to look at a model where the services are divided and they're split. And some of those services go to the community to help them be more accepting of people living in the community, of people using community resources, of people working in the community. Families need to be empowered to advocate for these kinds of things. They need to know how they can get a Think College program for their sons or daughters if they want their sons and daughters to go to college. One of my dear friends just passed away yesterday. His name was Lou Brown, and he was one of the first people I knew who ever had some individuals that would never have gone to college, go to college. And what the woman that I met with him said, Summersteins go to college. And so Michelle was going to go to college, even though she had a bunch of disability labels and people looked at her as being pretty incompetent. But she ended up going to Trinity College in Vermont. She graduated. She's now in her 40s. She's living a good life. And that's because that mom didn't look to the service system the way they were offering transition services, but really advocated for what she thought her daughter needed. So I want to just go through quickly some of the things that I think families need to be thinking about, which is alternatives to a service system. So for example, in terms of daily life and employment, rather than looking at sheltered workshops, day hab, even work crews or enclaves where you get sub-minimum wage, and some of those special programs, to look at things that prepare young adults, adolescents and young adults for things like entrepreneurships, micro enterprises, careers, competitive employment. Walt mentioned customized employment. Customized employment is a way of approaching employers and basically figuring out with them what their unmet needs are and being able to identify an individual with a disability who would not be able to hold down a traditional job description, but who could fulfill those unmet needs. So an example that I have is a young man that I work with who, I will tell you, he was incontinent. He used an augmentative communication device. He was very detail oriented, but he also had a lot of behavior problems. So, and I'm giving you the negative stuff because that's one of the things we can't be doing with this. We looked at him differently. We found out that with some videos of what we wanted him to do on his iPad and some still shots, he was able to do tasks that nobody thought he could do. Somebody left him by the computer one day and they noticed that he could copy type. Who knew? He's sitting there on the keyboard and he's copying something that somebody left on the table next to him. He is now working in an accounting firm where he does things like mail delivery. He does things like fetching stuff from the supply closet. He does things like being the sneaker messenger from one place to another if somebody needs to share work or whatever. He also does minor other kinds of things around the office. What the accounting firm has been able to do is to hire another accountant because he took the load off and was doing the work that other accountants didn't like, including copy typing. So somebody comes in with handwritten stuff, he's able to sit down and put it into the computer. And accountants who go to school to become accountants don't want to do that kind of stuff. They want to do their magic with numbers. So it was pretty cool for him to be in that customized job, which was approached in a very specific way. There will be a do-it-yourself manual for parents being published shortly, thanks to Walt's funding and our work at the USED. We will also be able to give you some workshops on that. And one of the other things that Walt talked about is Think College, and we're going to be doing a series of workshops, actually one workshop for 3 hours that's called Thinking College that will help parents make some of those decisions. So we don't want to be looking at people and saying, you know, we're gonna kind of let them hang out in a special ed room in the high school for 3 years, working on the same old, without thinking about what life really could be like for them. And everybody really can work if they have the right supports and they're in a situation. And those supports include assistive technology and includes people who may be really giving them some of the physical support they need. For community living, we don't want to be looking at group homes anymore. We don't want to be looking at those things that are funded by Medicaid, like Walt mentioned, intermediate care facilities. We don't want to be looking at special farms, separate communities, certainly not institutions or nursing homes. But there's all sorts of things that we're talking about now about co-housing, livable communities, universal design, people hiring their own people to come in. So these are all things that I think families need to use this time to really learn about. Same with how do you meet the social and spirituality needs? How do you make sure that people have healthy living opportunities that don't involve center-based therapies, special or institutional medical care, but gym memberships, community health centers, health fairs, family practice providers, and so on. The other thing financially, I think people need to be exploring is something called an ABLE account, which I don't know if people, did you do a section on this, Kevin? I've forgotten.
We did not go into ABLE accounts, no.
Okay, so I'm not going to go into it either, but I will give you a resource for it. But basically what an ABLE account does is it allows you to save money. Never again do you lose money and benefits by working. That has changed. The social administration Social Security Administration has a lot of programs that really focus on getting people back to work. You can make on a ticket to work program, which you have to apply for, but everybody gets on that. Everybody gets on ticket to work. You can earn up to $69,999.99 before they take away your Husky. That's a huge amount of money. And most people who are making that money have some sort of private insurance or can afford to buy their own insurance on the exchange. ABLE accounts also do not in any way affect what you're getting from Social Security or from SSDI. You have to meet certain criteria, like having a disability before age 26. But when you open an ABLE account, you can put up to $15,000 a year in it and save up to $100,000, never touching your Social Security. So you're always better off working because of these new programs that really want people in consistency with the DD Act to live meaningful lives in the community. And there's all sorts of ways to practice something called dignity of risk without actually telling somebody to go out and play with traffic. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things like reasonable risk, making mistakes and learning from them. We also have all sorts of citizenship and advocacy opportunities for students. People First has been meeting regularly twice a month since the pandemic began. There's Disability Rights Day at the Capitol. There's lots and lots of things going on for people with disabilities and for students to be able to learn some of those self-advocacy skills and self-determination skills. And most importantly, families need to figure out what they need for support. And that has to do with something called buckets, which is also part of charting the life course. Not only do you look for goods and services, you also need to discover and navigate all the possibilities that are out there. And you want to connect and network to build up your own, again, social capital and natural supports. And what I want people to leave this thinking about is this is another life course tool. Down in this lower right-hand corner, you see the same thing I do. In the lower right-hand corner, it says eligibility-based supports. That's
Linda,
traditionally.
I'm not sure if we're seeing what you're seeing.
Oh, okay. It should be part of the PowerPoint presentation. It didn't.
I see the first slide of your PowerPoint.
Well, that's not supposed to be there. What happened? So I've just been talking and it's not been moving forward. Well, I'll just explain it verbally then. There's something called an integrated services star, and it's got 5 parts. The first part is personal strengths and assets. And that's what can we do to really help the young people become as independent as possible or as self-assured as possible so they know how to ask for help when they need it. So if they're 18 years old and you're still zipping up their jacket and they can do it independently, you need to stop. You need to stop now. If they're 20 years old and they've never had any chores to do around the house, they need chores. They need chores now. You need to really step up to the plate to give your kids an opportunity to be like other kids within the confines of their challenges because of their disability. So I think the other thing in that circle of support is social resources. Most young adults who get jobs get it because of networks that their parents have had. Either Uncle Joe has a car dealership and he needs somebody to do some detailing, or they go to church with somebody, Mrs. Miller, and Mrs. Miller owns a fabric store and she really needs somebody who can help organize the merchandise, like buttons and so on and so forth. And because they know the individual through church and through those other connections, they're willing to hire them. And that means sometimes that parents have to step up to the plate. The other thing I say to parents is if you've got a child in a work experience program and the school says, oh, it's too bad, they're going to be aging out, they're not going to be able to be in this program anymore, it's so sad, the people at Starbucks really love them. Parents need to say, I'm going to that Starbucks an awful lot. I'm not going to say a word to the school district, but I'm going to be talking to every single manager there about hiring my kid at the end of school. And the district can go find another placement for the other students to have work experience because this has worked out and it's been making my kid really happy and so on. The other part of integrated services star is looking at assistive technology. The transition years are years to discover what technology can actually work best for your son or daughter. We're looking at having them be able to be as independent as possible, whether that means a smart home. It means having an Alexa in their own home. It's not necessarily a smart home, but it can certainly do things like remind them when it's time to take medication and so on. There is so much technology out there that can help young adults be independent, which they didn't have before. And so we can certainly reduce some of the staff support that people need to have if we know ahead of time what their assistive technology needs are. And really getting to know the communities. So those are the resources that when I think about what parents can do, it's exploring this stuff with their sons and daughters beforehand and not thinking everybody's going to go to a group home, everybody's going to go to a sheltered work environment, everybody's going to get so much from one of these state agencies and they'll knock on the door of the other and maybe they'll get some services. So it's a new day and we really need to start thinking about our kids differently, not the way the schools have told us that these are their deficits, these are things we have to remediate, et cetera. But what are their strengths? What are their interests? What are their preferences? And what would they like to do with their lives?
I had a question for you, Linda. What is customized employment?
So the example I gave of my friend, Elon, who works in the accounting firm, is a product of something called customized employment. What we did was we didn't look at his deficits. We didn't look at what he couldn't do. We looked at what he could do. He could follow still task analyses. He could follow, which meant that once he got in a job, all we had to do is videotape what needed to be done, or we needed to take still shots and put them in sequence. So the first part of it was discovering what he was good at and discovering what he liked. And the reason we focused on an accounting firm is he did not like being outside. He didn't care what the weather was like. He was not an outside kind of guy. So we looked for something where he would have a combination of different things to do, but it was still routine. So the first part of customized employment is discovery. It's learning about your sons and daughters. What do they like? What can they do? Who would need to support them? What kind of support they need? The second step is where you actually come up with a job plan and you look at the types of businesses and industries that are out there and where somebody could fit in. So for Elon, we figured he probably would do well in an office where there's pretty routine stuff, but that there's enough variety within the day where he can still learn to transition to other types of activities without a whole lot of drama. The next part was the actual job development piece where my staff went in. They actually did this with the number of different businesses and industries in the area. And they went into this accounting firm and they started out with what we call cups of coffee. So the first cup of coffee was basically saying, oh, just curious, I'm somebody who works in employment. They didn't say that they work with people with disabilities. We want to know more about your business. Is it possible to have 10 minutes of your time? And they would go and have 10 minutes of somebody's time who was in authority, who could tell them about the business, tell them what was going on and so on. And they could arrange for another visit where they were actually doing a tour. And at that point, they were looking things like how much is in somebody's in basket, how much time is wasted with people running over there, running here and there, and so on. People who are professionals, but who are doing clerical work, those types of things. And then they approach the employer with the third cup of coffee, which is basically, we notice that you have these needs as an employer. We have someone we think can meet those needs and free up your other staff to do the kinds of work that they enjoy and that you actually pay them to do. We would like you to meet this person, see if it's a good match. And we expect that if it's a good match, that you're going to pay this person at least minimum wage and have them be eligible for the same benefits that somebody else would have. And so we started Elon with a bunch of tasks that we literally trained him to do in the real environment. We couldn't teach him in his transition program because it wouldn't have generalized. He wouldn't have been able to take those skills and go somewhere else. But we could take the skills he already had and apply them to the new environment. So we did a lot of that kind of training on site, but we also trained the accountants and the receptionists to support him, which meant that they kept an eye on him and they would say things like, I think you shouldn't be looking at your, right now, what are you supposed to be doing? and he had a schedule. We taught him to show them the schedule. And so the upshot of all of it was he was hired at $17 an hour. He was eligible for their health plan, but he didn't need it because he was on Husky. He was eligible for raises, which he got. He was eligible for days off that were paid just like other employees. And like I said before, they ended up hiring another accountant. So customized employment is finding a win-win that's based on an individual's strengths, interests, preferences, et cetera, and the needs of an employer, and creating a match between the two of them. And that's how the employment situation is customized.
Thank you for explaining that. We have a number of questions that have come in. Also, there were some questions that came in by email before the webinar. So I'd like to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to call everyone back, and we'll have a Q&A session with the four of us on screen. And my last question is about the USED. What does the USED have to offer families during the COVID pandemic, or even young people who are making the transition from
So what I'm going to do is I'm bringing up another document that I am hoping. Do you see something that's called, it's got the USED letterhead on it?
I think we're looking at what you want, but I can't see the top of it.
I can't see it either because it's over here and I'm trying to move it to the other screen and it's not cooperating. So hang on one second and I will get it here. These are just some of the resources. So when the COVID quarantine first hit, we developed a number of resources for families and for others who are involved in providing supports and services. And as I said, my thing was to specifically look at, okay, I think we have it now. I just need to get it to view one page. Oh, that's too small. Let's do 100%. And somehow it moved over here. Okay. Don't know why it's being poopy, but it is. I apologize for this. So some of the things that we have, and this is going to frustrate me because I can't get it to where I want it to. There we go. I think that's it now. You see the Yukon Health logo?
I don't see it, no. If someone
Oh,
else.
it says it's paused. Let me try again. I think it didn't like me moving all that stuff around. There you go. Now do you see the Yukon Health logo?
Yes.
Okay, so what I did was I made a list and it's going to be available to anybody who's on this. And Kevin, I will not be able to know who those people are, but if they want to contact me directly, I can send it to them, or if you have a way of disseminating it, you can do that. So some of the things that we have are things that families can do together or on their own, like learning about ABLE accounts. There's some to-do tips for families about the Connecticut core transition skills. We don't have core standards, but there's a series of skills that we have. And unfortunately, the way our State Department of Ed developed them was so that it meant everybody needed to be independent. We rewrote them at the USED, so it means that everybody has an opportunity to do these things, which may mean that we have to create resources like transportation. Not everybody's going to be able to take public transportation. Not everybody's going to be able to get a driver's license. We have affordable and accessible housing. We have a whole bunch of information on that and what people can be looking at. We have tips for parents about teaching academics in a fun way, like going on some of the National Geographic websites or Britannica, or even some of the movies that are out, documentaries. We have a checklist if families want to prepare their sons and daughters for emergency. We have something called the Prep is Personal checklist, and it allows you to figure what needs to be a go with if you're going to have to evacuate your home. We have a lot of resources on building a great life. We want people to develop plans to increase social capital, life course tools, Walt already mentioned. learn about assistive technology. We have Oak Hill Assistive Technology, and we also have the Assistive Technology and Education Transition website, and our BRS, our Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, has an assistive technology center that is our national center. What are reasonable accommodations? There's a great website called askjan.org, and exploring that can really help identify what an individual needs for reasonable accommodations, which is important because most people think only in terms of ramps, or if you're in school, having untimed tests or a writer or a reader. There's so many more accommodations that are reasonable that people can have, like wearing headphones if they can't handle the background noise. There's also a pre-college summer program for people whose students are probably going to go to college in a more traditional way, but are going to be making heavy use of the Disability Services Office and who really need to have that experience before they feel comfortable going to college. We have things to do in terms of just stuff to do. We have the Think College home, and Think College, by the way, is specifically for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And there's 3 in the state of Connecticut that are true Think College models. But we really need parents to continue to advocate for that because, like I said, summer students go to college, and some of the families on this call probably all went to college too. Life Course Nexus, we already talked about. There's some upcoming events that I would encourage families to sign up for. This coming Thursday, there's another Building a Great Life webinar, and this is about understanding benefits, financial responsibility, and ABLE accounts. And I've got the link, so if you can get this out to people, they can still sign up, and I'll make sure that they open that up again. We have other BAGLE webinars that are either coming up or that have already been recorded, with the exception of one that got lost. And Thinking College, there's definitely, like I said, there's some things coming up that I'm teaching on the 17th of May, again on the 24th, and again on the 7th. It's the same 3-hour program to talk about all of the different ways that you can think about college for students with disabilities. And my contact information is also there. So those are some of the things that we do for transition age, post-secondary, and adult supports.
I can see you do a lot. And to our participants, I have all your email addresses. You were kind enough to register before the webinar. So Linda, I'll be glad to forward that document with all the links to the people who participated in the webinar. If you could just make sure you email it to me, I will get it out within the next 24 hours.
That is wonderful. And if I can just ask one more favor before we go into Q&A, because I don't know how long that's going to last, and I can't find it here, but I do have an evaluation that I need people to do, just because I get fired if I don't have people do evaluations. We're required by our funders to report on how many people we trained and those types of things, and whether or not we did a decent job. So I'm gonna find that link, and I'm gonna get it up in the chat room before we end, if that's okay.
All right, yes, please do that.
Okay.
And I would also like to include that link when I send out the document that we were talking about a second ago. And folks, it's generous and nice of you to fill out the questionnaire. The USED is not a for-profit business, just like PATH is not a for-profit business. And gathering data to prove that we're carrying out our mission and supplying it to the folks who are our funders, that's the nonprofit equivalent of a for-profit business doing its billing. You know, a business can be really good and really meet people's needs, but if they don't bill for it, it goes away soon. So please cooperate with that survey. It would be great. And at this point, I would like to call back everyone. Walt, Audra, if you would turn on your cameras, please. And let's look at some Q&A. As a parent of a child with intellectual disability who is an adult now, how different are parenting and advocacy now? How did your child transition out of post-secondary into adulthood? What worked and works along with Life Course? Walt, would you like to take a shot at that?
Look at it, Walt.
Sure. I'll take a shot at that. Well, I'll share the experience I had with Nick, and I have to give Linda some credit for this. Linda and I have known one another for I think 30 years now. She's been involved with my son.
Nick was 3.
Most of his life, yeah. Anyway, when it came to transition, what worked? Well, the first thing we did is he did not spend his transition years in the high school building. He walked in the graduation ceremony with his age peers at the end of his 4th year of high school. He received a certificate, not a diploma, and then had 3 years of transition services outside of the high school building, okay? It was an individualized program. Again, there's an I in IEP, never forget that. He spent, in those 3 years, he spent half his day attending Manchester Community College, where he mostly took courses out of the regular catalog. It was not a special program, it was community college. He took English and math and sociology and public speaking, and he passed some classes, he failed some classes, but he had the college experience. That was his mornings. His afternoons he spent in trial employment experiences. He tried 10 different jobs in retail, restaurants, clerking, hospitals and town halls, and learned what it was to work, and ended that time working in the job that he still has. He received services during that time from an agency that also worked for the Department of Developmental Services. So when he transitioned, it was a seamless transition, and it was an awkward year. That was a year that the legislature did not pass a budget. No, they passed a budget, and the Governor Rell refused to sign it. So there was no budget for DDS until the budget went into effect by default in the fall. So his employer hired him when his school services ended, despite the fact that he wasn't getting any support from DDS, and that was a marvelous thing that happened there. So he's a regular employee there. He's not employed by an agency, his support agency. He's employed by Big Y Supermarkets. He has a 401k, etc., subject to all of their employee supports and discipline and everything else. So I think that the thing that worked best was getting him out of the school in an individualized program, not, I repeat, not the canned school system transition program, in real jobs, in a real college experience. And I think that's made a tremendous difference.
Well, as all of us, I think, have said at one point or another during this webinar, it's not one size fits all, or at least it shouldn't be. And is a good example of what happens when it's individualized. And isn't that what special education is all about? Individualizing things. Here's a question about BRS. Does BRS provide transition services at age 17? Who would like to take that question?
I'll take a shot at that. Linda may want to chime in, but at that age, the student is still eligible, under the IDEA, still has an IDEA mandate. BRS is required by federal law to provide supports to school districts. In Connecticut, they do that through something called the Level Up program. I, like everything else, you have to work to individualize your experience to make it valuable. But it's my understanding that if a student in school is going to get services from BRS, they are most likely going to get it through the Level Up program. Linda, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, that's true. They do not, they will not actually provide BRS services until the student graduates or ages out of the IDEA system. but they will do job prep and they'll help with work experience. They'll do some classes on resume writing, those types of things to supplement what's going on in the schools. But they're also very limited in the time that they have. So they tend to focus on students that don't have the most significant challenges, even though they're really supposed to focus by law on those who have the most significant challenges.
And I want to add here, since we're talking about employment supports in school, in that age group and transition, part of the customized employment method is that students create something, do a process called
Discovery.
Discovery. Thank you, Linda. Discovery, and they create a portfolio. This fits very nicely with the life course formalism as well, where a student explores their own interests, strengths, challenges, and puts together a profile that is then used as the basis for job development. And I highly recommend that as an activity that I think that should be put in every single student's IEP for transition, is that they do the discovery process for customized employment, so that they have the data, the information about the individual that can be then relayed to a job developer or BRS to assist in either customized employment or placement, whatever is appropriate.
Here's a question that came in by email. And Audra, I'd like to direct it at you, at least give you first crack. I would like everyone who wants to contribute an answer to feel free to speak. But Audra, it's this. When should you start planning for your child's transition from school to adult life? You're a parent yourself, Audra. You've probably given this much thought. What do you think?
Well, Kevin, thanks for having me answer that one, because that one's very near and dear to my heart. You know, being the parent of two children with multiple exceptionalities, with the primary being autism for both of them, different parts of the spectrum, if you will. I have to tell you, from probably a very early age, maybe about, I want to say first grade, I was always thinking about not so much adult transition, but how am I going to set them up for the most individualized life, but most independent life that I can as a parent? What do I do? What do I ask for? How do I set up that IEP? Even for those adaptive life skills for my son, who's now 13, believe it or not. So I think, you know, through the life stages as parents, we always have to be looking at what are the things that we can do. And Linda, you nailed it. And I was kind of laughing as you were saying this, because this is how I think. Let them pull the zipper themselves. I actually had to stop myself from doing things like that, because I thought to myself, he needs to do that himself someday, because I'm not always going to be around to do it for him. And, you know, I think that's so important, and embedding that into the IEP and asking for the specific evaluations in order to gather the data to write those goals and objectives that can be implemented throughout the life stage. I think another really, really important part, and, you know, kind of this is to you, Walt, is I wrote it down because you said it perfectly, that every IEP should have the customized discovery in it. So, you know, I actually learned something from you tonight. So that's starting tomorrow, my next PPT meeting for this age group. That's something I'm going to be looking at and putting in there, because we have to create it as we go as parents.
And I'd just like to add to that, Audra, that discovery is not doing the same old. It's really pushing the envelope, getting out into the community, seeing. I mean, somebody laughed and said, "You do mall therapy." I said, "No, I don't. I walk through the mall with people to see what attracts them." So when I have somebody, they've closed now, but the San Francisco Music Box thing, when I had somebody going there and fascinated with the workings of that, I'm thinking, I need to get this person into something where they're building things and they're doing something with electronics or stuff that moves and little things. And, you know, and I go someplace, someplace else and they're hanging around the food court. That's all they're interested in. Well, maybe that's not a vocational thing because maybe they just really like to eat, but it could be a fascination. And so that leads to employment. So you really have to get out there with your kids and do funky stuff. I mean, even do job fairs and job tours. Go ahead, Walt.
Linda makes a really good point that, discovery is not an interview. Discovery, my son, those 3 years that he was out there going to community college and trying different work experiences, that's a discovery process. So discovery process is active. It's engaging. It's because you don't know what you don't know, and an individual doesn't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So you can't just ask. It's a little more than that. It's getting out there and seeing how the individual and having the individual learn how they interact, how they respond to different real world situations. And the other thing about, you can't start too early. Audra, I'm so glad that you made that point because I remember in my son's, I understand my son's in his 30s now, but I can still remember his 4th grade PPT. And, I brought up the topic of college. And the special education director immediately shut me down and say, "Oh, no, you can't do that. IEPs are for 1 year only." Don't let them do that. You've got to you can't start too early. That it's eyes on the prize. You need to be looking ahead. I always ask parents, when they're talking about transition planning and IEP goals is, okay, what's your vision for your child's life when they're 30 years old? Okay, now when your kid's 13, that's jarring, but you can't start thinking about this too early.
Yeah.
And I think if I could just say, one of the life course tools is really good for that because it starts with the vision. And the vision, think about yourself and what your own vision is. Would you limit yourself to, I'm going to live in a group home and be in a sheltered workshop and go out as a clump to the same things that everybody else does or sit around and watch TV on those other nights? What would you want to have for a fulfilling life? And so the vision really should be what it would be like if your son or daughter did not have a disability. And then you go into look at what experiences are leading toward that and what experiences are not leading toward that. And a lot of times when I had those things about services, those services are the things that are standing in the way of reaching that vision because they don't share that vision with you. And I think that's so important for families to help figure out what is realistic, what is something that all of us would want. Relationships, and it doesn't have to be marriage and kids, but you want to have friends. Working one-on-one in a closet during your school years is not going to help you make friends. So they really have to start thinking like that too.
Yeah, Linda, I agree. Something that both of you brought up before was I call it backwards planning. It's how I plan everything in our lives because it's like sometimes it's a logistical nightmare with with getting into the car even sometimes with my 2 kids, but it's that idea of where do you want to be, like you just said, Linda, and then all those things like in also preserving the dignity of the individual. That is so important to me. I say that in meetings. I say it about my own kids. They get to have a full, fulfilling, independent life as much as possible. And this planning process, it is overwhelming, and I'm kind of just, I'm not just entering that part of it, but just hearing so much information all at once, it is overwhelming for parents. And I get it. You guys know that. But, I look forward to, planning that. And it's kind of exciting that I get to learn some new things about both of my kids, but my son first as we're going along because he's first in line. But learning new things about him, what his true interests are. He's not just this kid that's repetitively lining up trains over there in the corner. There's actually a function to that. And what's his motivation to that, and learning that and then capitalizing on that strength that he has, because I know it's there.
And sometimes, I learned this when I was in 3rd grade, and my principal said I was a very well-behaved child. And my mother said, Linda, well behaved. So I mean,
Yeah.
the point of that is that kids behave differently in different situations and around different people. So part of that discovery process is really making other people like school staff get your child out into the community and doing things with them, and not just, and I want to say this because I don't think anyone said it as explicitly as I'm going to say it. Do not ever let someone say, oh, we have a program here for transition, so we're going to write that into the IEP and your son or daughter is going to be there for the next 3 years. Isn't that wonderful? And that's where you say absolutely, positively not. Unless it focuses on discovery, it's actually out in the community. They're getting genuine work experiences. They can get a job from those work experiences. You're not just going to make everybody do the same thing all the time, and it's going to be individualized. Anyone who wants to send somebody to their transition program, isn't it wonderful?
Sorry, Kevin, you took over your question.
Kevin, there's a question in the chat about guardianship, and I happen to have some material here to share on that if you would like to go there.
That would be great. And I was going to ask you about that next. So go ahead, you have the floor.
Okay, here we go. I'm doing a screen share. And here it is. Okay, my one slide summary on supported decision making. Okay, we now have available to folks an alternative to guardianship. We call it supported decision making, where an individual can make an agreement with the people around them who they trust to help them with decision making without giving up their liberties and subjecting themselves to guardianship. So how did guardianship come about? For students in transition, what I've seen is most often it seems schools are telling parents that in order for you to have access to educational records, be a part of your son's planning after they turn 18, as well as medical and financial and other legal things, you have to have a guardianship. Okay, I am here to say to you unequivocally that is false. Not true. Okay. There may be reason for guardianship in some few cases. We can talk about that later. But you do not need a guardianship to have access to educational, medical, and financial records, or to be a part of your child's decision-making in those areas. Absolutely not. There are other ways to do that, okay? There is something now called a supported decision-making agreement. It's still very new. But prior to that, we have in Connecticut power of attorney. Any individual 18 years and older under Connecticut law, regardless of IQ or disability or anything else, without question, every person 18 and older is assumed to be competent. That's fundamental law, okay? That's a fundamental liberty in the United States, okay? Now that person can give you power of attorney to make decisions for them, assist them with things, have access to records. They can sign it. They can make you their healthcare representative through a healthcare proxy. There's a number of ways that this can be done legally. There's also this thing called a supported decision-making agreement, but they do not have to be in a guardianship. And understand that when you do a guardianship on an individual, you have to go in front of a judge with experts and convince the judge that this individual is incompetent and unable to make their own decisions. When you do that, you deprive them of their personal liberties. Okay, that's a fact. Now, you know, if a person requires guardianship, I'm not sure they ever do. You can always do it later, but you certainly don't have to do it as a matter of course when a person turns 18. Okay, now you do have to do something, right? When your child turns 18, they're an adult, they have their own rights, they can shut you out if they want to. Hopefully you have a better relationship than that. I do with my son, right? So you before they turn 18 or on their 18th birthday, have them sign a power of attorney that gives you the authority to see their records, to make decisions for them if necessary on terms that they dictate. They still remain in charge of their life. They still have all their personal liberties. As the need arises, they can sign releases at hospitals or doctors' offices or schools or anywhere else to authorize you to have access to records, attend meetings, help them with decision making, but that does not require a guardianship. Absolutely not. And undoing guardianships is not trivial. Once you go and you argue to a judge that a person's incompetent, going back later and saying, "Oh, never mind," it can be done. But why? Why go there? Okay, there are legal instruments. You know, I'm a big fan of the power of attorney. That's what I have with my son. But there are these legal instruments, including supported decision-making agreements, where you can have your child can authorize you to be a part of their decision-making, attend PPT meetings, do banking for them, go to the doctor's office, see their medical records. Some of these other entities may require your child to sign an additional release. That's fine, okay? But never let anybody tell you that you must have a guardianship for these things. You don't.
Well, I also want to add,
much more.
I want to just add one thing too. When you talk about depriving somebody of rights, many people who become guardians for their own children or conservators, depending on what system you're in, do it with the full expectation that they're going to allow their sons or daughters to still make their own decisions, that they're only there in case of. If you become a guardian and you're thinking in case of, what's going to happen if you're not there? And I've heard families say, well, then my son is going to take over or my cousin is going to take over. Well, what if they don't want to at that time? You know what the court does? Because your son or daughter has already been declared incompetent, the court will find somebody else. And having worked with adults for long enough, I can tell you that those somebody else's do it for the money, very seldom care or even know what your son or daughter needs. So they're going to be making decisions about finances, about healthcare, and everything else with their own personal prejudices and their own desire to get a check cut because they're getting paid to be the guardian. So don't risk that. Make your son or daughter have the power and make sure that you continue to develop your social capital so that there's always other people around them who will care about them.
I think that here in this part of the country, the home of the American Revolution, the notion of liberty is something that strikes close to home for all of us. You know, we have time for just one more question before our coach turns into a pumpkin, and it's from the email bag. And this is for anyone who would like to go first. Transition assessment. What is it and who does the testing?
Take that.
I realize this is like asking, what is love? And just keep it to 5 minutes. But,
so what you don't want to do is you don't want to have somebody sit down and give a paper and pencil test and declare that your son or daughter can only do X, Y, or Z. Transition assessments have to be very broad-based, and a lot of them have to take place through observation and in the community. There are some things that people can fill out, like there's a wonderful website called ONET, O*NET, that people can take various assessments and so on. You can go on the Department of Labor website and find lots of different things. What you don't want is some person who's developed a test and sold it to the school district who, like I said, is going to use that and predict what your son or daughter is going to be able to do. If you had looked at what I had taken in 8th grade, I wouldn't be here right now. I didn't do well on that test at all. And I don't have a disability, or I didn't then anyway. I think it's really important that you familiarize yourself with the different assessment tools that are out there. And you really want to be looking at assessments, not tests, assessments. Tests compare somebody to a norm. You don't need to know what deficits your kid has at this point. You want assessments of what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they're not so good at and would need support for. So look at assessments. There's tons of things out there that are really good and that can help to kind of drive the process. And actually, believe it or not, there's a website for transition in the state of Connecticut that our State Department of Education has, and they have a number of those tools there, and they're actually pretty good. There's some there you wouldn't want to give to a dead clam, but there's other things there that I think are really very humanly oriented and will really help do that discovery that you need to have done during these years.
And who should do the assessment? Who is qualified?
The team. The individual should contribute to their own assessments. The family should contribute to the assessment. You know, I've sat at PPTs with parents who said, oh, when my daughter goes to the Y, she brings in her own card and she goes in, I just drop her off and she goes in, and the school's going, what? She doesn't have somebody following her? We have a one-to-one paraprofessional. She's not allowed to go anywhere without that one-to-one paraprofessional. You know, there's something wrong with this picture here. So parents should be doing some of that assessment and contributing to the portfolio that Walt was mentioning before. And all of that information that's gathered should be a team process. And the only time you need testing for transition, hey there, somebody's gotten really big. The only time you need testing for transition, honestly, and this really stinks, is if you're under the age of 18 and you're looking for services from the Department of Developmental Services, because then you have to flunk your IQ test and you have to flunk an adaptive behavior scale. That's the only time that you should allow formal testing to be done. And that's only if your child has ID. You already know that. Sucks. It's true.
Well, thank you.
In any case,
Walt,
you
please
want,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I mean, the whole assessment thing. I mean, what's the point? You know, back to my earlier presentation. What's the outcome you're seeking here, right? You know, it does no good to categorize people or to just to document all these deficits or whatever the point of that process is. You know, unless you're going to achieve some goal. You know, the focus should be, this is why life course is so valuable, but the focus should be on where does that individual want to go? You know, what are their aspirations? And everybody has aspirations, right? I mean, sometimes they may be a challenge to discern, but everybody has aspirations. What are they? And then what's the process? What's the services and supports that are going to be put in place to help that person become all that they can be, you know, in their, you know, according to their own desires. So, you know, the assessment thing, I mean, what's the point?
Well, there's a difference between testing and assessing. And when you talked about Nick having all those different places that he tried before he landed at Big Y, that's an assessment.
Well, it's discovery.
It's part of discovery, but that's an assessment. From an educator's perspective, that's an assessment, because what does he like? What doesn't he like? The outcome is to find out what does he like and what doesn't he like. That's an assessment. You can't sit down and test Nick on food service because it was an act of God to get him to
Actually, we're doing it. We're going through that again right now. But anyway.
I know. But you know how difficult. So there's certain things that you need to do because society demands it. But no, I'm not talking about those kinds of tests. And quite frankly, with apprenticeship programs, we shouldn't be doing that with adults either. But I did put the evaluation thing. It says HTTPS /2/UConn and then a whole bunch of other stuff after that. So if people want to just click on that, it'll bring them to the site and they'll still be able to leave this incredible evening. Thank you. Really appreciate being invited to participate in this.
Yeah, this was really great. So informative. And I'm seeing there's more questions coming in the chat box.
Oh, yes, there are. Linda, what is the name of your presentation?
I didn't have one. I pulled it together from a lot of other things, but if you want a copy of my PowerPoint, I can send that to Kevin also. It also has some other stuff in it that I was originally thinking of doing, but then when I found out it was more of a panel thing. But I have lots of information, like I said, if people want to have, and we are about to publish Customized Employment, Do It Yourself for Families. We've got those Thinking College workshops coming up. And we are hopefully, if we can ever find an instructional designer, I'm asking everybody here to actually put on the 16-hour training that I was doing that was based in life course, but focused on transition from school to adulthood. And we're developing an adulting program, which will be for students themselves so that they learn things about how they discover what they like and what kinds of houses they want to live in and what they would need to do to get there and those types of things.
So Linda, when filling out the Yukon survey and checking off the checkbox for which presentation you gave, what should we do?
It's just down as answers tonight. So if you strongly agree that I knew what I was talking about, we didn't really have objectives so far, except to give you information. Do what you want with that. I take it very seriously if somebody says that this was bad, or if they want more of something, because I'm used to thinking as though there is no box. So I get beaten up a lot by people for things that I say, and I really don't care. But I do care to the extent that I can make things better. So feel free to just, to me, the most important stuff are those open-ended things at the bottom, because they help me. The other stuff's just data collection. So whatever.
Kevin, her funding source needs to know what this audience thought of the presentation.
Yes, but the funding source only pays for a certain percentage of my time. So the funding source will only get that percentage of the evaluations. And honestly, most of the stuff that I do, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of the wonderful projects that I'm working on are indeed funded by the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities, because they're part of our triumvirate of agencies funded under the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act.
Kevin, there's another question in the Q&A. Do you still have time?
Yes, and it is one that I would like to answer.
Can I just say, if nobody minds, I'm going to sign off to catch the very tail end of the meeting that I skipped to be with y'all tonight, because I thought this would be fun. So thank you, everybody. I can't see the audience, but I will send Kevin my PowerPoint. I already sent you if people didn't get it off the chat room, and I also sent the list of resources, which has the live links on it. So good night, everybody, and thank you.
Bye, Linda. Thank you. Hope to have you back sometime soon. Okay, and like a superhero, she's suddenly gone. One last question, which I would like to field. Will we be able to get a copy of this video? And that answer is a big yes. This webinar will be turned into a YouTube video and posted by the end of the week. So go to the PATH YouTube channel just by searching PATH CT. You'll see all the PATH videos and also every webinar, answers webinar that has been produced. Walt, I want to thank you for appearing tonight. I hope you can come back and join us again real soon.
Always available.
Audra, as always, it's good to have you here, and we will see you at the next edition of Answers. And in that edition, we will return and look for more answers to the questions you're asking as the journey continues. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.